The 90s were a decade in which the studio machine became fully optimized for one thing: legibility. If a film couldn't be described in a sentence, positioned on a poster, and attached to an existing franchise, it was in trouble. And several genuinely extraordinary films fell directly through that gap between what studios knew how to sell and what thoughtful audiences actually wanted. 3 conditions qualify a film for this list. It had to fail commercially and unambiguously. Real losses, not just underperformance. It had to have genuine artistic ambition that distinguishes it from films that merely hold up. These films were always great, and the culture wasn't ready. And the gap between its theatrical fate and its current reputation has to be wide enough to be genuinely interesting. These 10 films satisfy all 3. The story of why each one failed is as compelling as the film itself. Let's get into it. Number 10, The Big Lebowski, 1998. At number 10, the most famous entry on this list, placed here deliberately at the bottom, because its secret has been out for decades. The analytical work isn't to introduce it. It's to explain how this happened. The Coens arrived at Universal fresh off Fargo, 2 Oscars, 24 million domestic on a $7 million budget, and spent that creative capital on something almost perversely uncommercial, a shaggy, plotless neo-noir comedy centered on an unemployed pot-smoking bowling enthusiast named Jeffrey the Dude Lebowski, who was pulled into a kidnapping scheme when criminals mistake him for a millionaire of the same name. The Dude doesn't solve the mystery. The mystery doesn't resolve cleanly. The plot is, by design, beside the point. Critics in 1998 measured it against Fargo and found it incoherent. It opened in March, still competing with Titanic's 11th week of dominance, and was gone within weeks. The marketing team had no idea what to do with it. What they couldn't process, and what made the film immortal, is that the Dude is not a slacker to be pitied. He is a man who has genuinely achieved a kind of Zen indifference to the anxiety driving everyone around him. Every other character in the film wants something. The Dude abides. In 1998, this read as passivity. As ambient cultural anxiety has steadily increased in every year since, it has read as wisdom. Today, it is preserved in the National Film Registry. It inspired an annual festival running since 2002. It spawned a real religion, Dudism, with over 600,000 ordained ministers. When Jeff Bridges learned the film had flopped, he was genuinely surprised. That surprise tells you everything. Number 9, Fight Club, 1999. Number 9 is not simply a mismarketed film. It is a film whose studio couldn't fully process what it had made, and whose critics in 1999 found it nihilistic and dangerous, and that audiences in 2026 consider one of the essential artistic statements of its decade. Fox's marketing positioned it as a straightforward, aggressive action film. Shirtless men, fist impacts. This attracted exactly the wrong audience and repelled the right one. Roger Ebert gave it 2 stars, called it cheerfully fascist, and later revised his position significantly. Domestic gross, 37 meters against a $63 million budget. What makes Fight Club genuinely great rather than merely provocative is David Fincher's absolute control of information, the IKEA aesthetic of the narrator's apartment, the specific way Brad Pitt and Edward Norton never share a frame before the reveal, the escalating unreliability of the narrator's voiceover, the subliminal single-frame Pitt insertions before his character is formally introduced. Every element is organized toward a single architectural purpose. The film is not chaotic. It is precisely engineered to feel chaotic. What most people don't know, in 2022, Chinese streaming platform Tencent altered the film's ending without Fincher's consent, showing law enforcement stopping Tyler Durden and completely inverting the film's meaning. A film censors found threatening enough to surgically alter 23 years after release was not a bomb, because it was bad. It was a bomb because it was ahead of its moment. That is the sharpest possible illustration of what this entire list is about. Number 8, The Iron Giant, 1999. At number 8, the most heartbreaking entry on this list, now universally acknowledged as one of the greatest animated features ever made, and the definitive cautionary tale about what happens when corporate mismanagement swallows artistic vision. Brad Bird, who would later make The Incredibles and Ratatouille, set his directorial debut in 1957 Maine at the height of Cold War paranoia. 9-year-old Hogarth befriends a massive alien robot, harboring dormant weapons of extraordinary destructive power. A paranoid government agent pursues the giant. The film's central line, "You are what you choose to be," is one of American cinema's most direct statements about identity and the difference between what you are capable of and what you choose to do. The failure was entirely Warner Brothers'. After the catastrophic performance of Quest for Camelot, the studio had mentally abandoned traditional animation. Despite extraordinary test screenings, resources were redirected to Wild Wild West. McDonald's tied its summer Happy Meal to Inspector Gadget. The advertising spend was minimal. The film opened at number 9 at the box office. What most people don't know is the scale of the institutional indifference. This was not a film that received a fair chance and failed. It was a film that was never given the chance at all. A signature edition re-release in 2015 sold out theaters. Vin Diesel's performance, the giant speaks in monosyllables, each inflected with a different emotional weight, is recognized as one of the finest in animation history. The Iron Giant story is not about a great film that bombed. It is about a system that couldn't distinguish between a bad film and a great one. It didn't know how to sell. That distinction matters. Number 7. Starship Troopers, 1997. Alright, we are moving now from films you definitely know to films you know but haven't fully understood. Number 7 is The Entry, where the rehabilitation work is most necessary, because most audiences who have seen it still haven't seen what it actually is. Critics who called Starship Troopers fascist identified its subject matter and completely missed its authorial position. Paul Verhoeven, a Dutch filmmaker who survived Nazi occupation as a child, constructed a film using the full aesthetic vocabulary of fascist propaganda. Leni Riefenstahl-style recruitment newsreels, rousing military speeches to cheering youth, state media presenting enemy casualties as entertainment, a society with no visible civilian culture. He placed the audience inside it as enthusiastic participants without announcing the satirical intent. He trusted the audience to experience the discomfort of recognizing they were being recruited by the same mechanisms they would theoretically oppose. The soldiers are blonde, beautiful, and interchangeable. The enemy is alien enough to justify total war without moral complication. Every element is deliberate. When Verhoeven heard audiences cheer the military spectacle without irony, he considered the experiment both successful and troubling. The film's second weekend domestic drop of 54% reflected the specific failure mode of satire that reveals itself slowly. Audiences who came for action, blockbuster entertainment felt vaguely unclean afterward, without being able to articulate why, and told their friends accordingly. Starship Troopers is now studied in university courses on political satire and media studies. Its prediction of a media landscape built around manufactured patriotic enthusiasm and the aestheticization of military violence has aged from provocative satire into something closer to documentary. Watch it again knowing what it is. It is a completely different film. Number 6, Dark City, 1998. I know some people are going to push back on including this in the well-known tier. Most people have heard of Dark City. Far fewer have actually seen it, and almost none have seen the version they should be watching. Dark City, number 6. Alex Proyas constructed a world of absolute visual distinction. A city of perpetual darkness, circa 1940s noir aesthetics, where pallid figures called the Strangers can stop time and reshape physical reality with their minds. John Murdoch wakes in a bathtub with no memory, a dead woman in the room, and the police closing in. He discovers he can also reshape reality and begins to understand that the city is a laboratory, its inhabitants having their memories and identities reassigned nightly by alien scientists studying humanity in search of the soul. The film's central argument, that identity is more than memory, that the self persists through the erasure of its history, is executed with a seriousness rare in genre filmmaking. Roger Ebert called it the greatest film he had seen that year and recorded a personal audio commentary for the director's cut because he felt that strongly about it. What most people don't know is the Matrix connection. Dark City and The Matrix were filmed simultaneously at Fox Studios Australia and share significant crew, including production designer Owen Patterson. The visual and conceptual DNA between the two films is extensive. The Matrix arrived 1 year later, cost twice as much, was marketed brilliantly, and made 463 mailers worldwide. Dark City made 27 mailers. That is the starkest illustration on this entire list of how marketing and timing, rather than quality, determine theatrical fate. One critical note: the theatrical cut was compromised without Proyas's input. New Line added a voiceover prologue that explains the film's central mystery in its first 60 seconds, spoiling its own twist before the opening credits. Watch the director's cut. It is a significantly better film, and the version Proyas actually made. We're now entering top 5 territory. The films from here on are the ones most people haven't seen, and the reasons they disappeared have nothing to do with their quality. Number 5, Strange Days, 1995. At number 5, the most prophetic film of the 90s, a work of such precise prescience that watching it today produces not nostalgia, but the specific unease of watching someone accurately describe your present from 3 decades away. Kathryn Bigelow and James Cameron set the film in Los Angeles over the final 48 hours of 1999. A technology called Squid allows users to record and play back the full sensory experience of any moment, sight, sound, touch, emotion, directly through a neural interface, street name, Clips. Lenny Nero, played by Ralph Fiennes, is a disgraced ex-cop dealing clips out of the trunk of his car when a snuff recording arrives depicting a murder from the killer's point of view, the first of its kind, pulling him into a conspiracy involving police brutality and a cover-up threatening to ignite an already volatile city. The film addresses police violence against Black Americans, surveillance technology, digital addiction, and the relationship between media consumption and political passivity, all with the clarity that mainstream 1995 cinema had neither the language nor the appetite for. It lost approximately 34 Mallers and was considered one of the bigger failures of its year. Angela Bassett's performance as Mace, Lenny's ex-partner and the film's moral center, is the backbone of the whole thing and has been recognized as one of the finest action drama performances of the decade. The Squid technology predates GoPro culture, first-person video sharing, immersive VR, and the specific pathology of vicariously living through recorded experience by 15 to 30 years. What the film diagnosed as dystopia in 1995 is the infrastructure of entertainment in 2026. That is not an accident of prescience. That is a filmmaker seeing clearly while everyone around her looked away. Number 4, Miller's Crossing, 1990. Number 4 is the Coen brothers film that their most devoted admirers cite as their finest work, while general audiences have largely forgotten it exists. Overtaken in cultural memory by Fargo, Lebowski, and No Country for Old Men, it is, by any formalist measure, one of the most perfectly crafted American films of the decade. Set during Prohibition, the film follows Tom Reagan, Gabriel Byrne, senior lieutenant of Irish mob boss Leo O'Bannon, navigating a gang war triggered when Leo refuses to sanction the killing of Bernie Birnbaum, a bookie cheating everyone. Tom has been sleeping with Bernie's sister, who is also Leo's girlfriend. His loyalties and his betrayals are impossible to disentangle. The film's central question, what does it mean to have principles in a world organized entirely around naked self-interest, is posed with an intellectual seriousness that refuses conventional gangster cinema's sentimental resolutions. The film arrived the same year as Goodfellas and was immediately obliterated. Scorsese's film is operatic, propulsive, and emotionally overwhelming. The Coens is cold, cerebral, and formally intricate. Both are great, but 1990 audiences who wanted a gangster epic went to Goodfellas and never found Miller's Crossing. What most people don't know is the deliberate narrative withholding. Tom Reagan never directly states his motivations for any of his key decisions. The film trusts the audience to work backward from consequences to causes, a demanding quality that is exactly why it failed in 1990 and rewards every subsequent viewing more generously than the last. It is a film that gets richer the more you understand it, which means first viewings are necessarily incomplete. That is not a flaw. That is a design decision. One of the most unjustly invisible great films of its decade. Number 3, Ravenous, 1999. We are in the top 3. From here, the films are the genuine deep cuts. The ones most people haven't seen, that will send viewers directly to a streaming search, and that will pay that search off completely. Number 3 made $2 million at the box office against a $12 million budget. It is one of the finest films of the decade. The gap between those two sentences is the entire argument for this list. Set in 1847 at a remote U.S. Army outpost in the Sierra Nevada, Ravenous follows Captain John Boyd, Guy Pearce, whose exile posting is interrupted by the near-dead Colquhoun, played by Robert Carlyle, who arrives with a story about snowbound cannibalism and the Wendigo myth, that consuming human flesh transfers the victim's strength to the consumer, along with an insatiable hunger for more. The film uses cannibalism as a precise metaphor for American expansionism. It is set during Manifest Destiny. Colquhoun's philosophy is that consumption of the strong is simply the engine by which civilizations are built. America, the film argues with dark wit, was constructed on exactly this logic. It is a horror film and a comedy, and a political allegory simultaneously. This tonal range was what critics in 1999 couldn't accommodate. The word they reached for was incoherent. The word they should have reached for was ambitious. What most people don't know about Ravenous is the score. Damon Albarn, Blur, Gorillaz, and composer Michael Nyman created one of the strangest, most effective film scores of the decade. Banjo and fiddle arrangements that are simultaneously American folk music and something deeply wrong, bright and jagged and relentlessly propulsive. It externalizes the film's cognitive dissonance perfectly and has found its own cult audience as a standalone album. Director Antonia Bird was brought in mid-production after the studio fired the original director. She and the cast rebuilt the film largely in post-production. That improvised quality is both the film's vulnerability and its extraordinary restless energy. Seek this one out. It is unlike anything else in this decade's cinema, and it means what it says. Number 2, The Quick and the Dead, 1995. Number 2 arrived when the Western was commercially moribund, starred a woman in an action lead the industry refused to believe was viable, and was too visually eccentric for audiences expecting a conventional genre film. It failed convincingly. It is also one of the most purely inventive action films of the decade, assembled around a cast that constitutes perhaps the most remarkable assembly of talent in any box office bomb in Hollywood history. Sam Raimi, constitutionally incapable of pointing a camera conventionally, brought his full Evil Dead arsenal of visual excess to a tournament Western. Sharon Stone plays a mysterious woman who arrives in the town of Redemption to compete in a quick-draw elimination contest presided over by the town's tyrant, John Herod, Gene Hackman at peak villainous menace. Ellen has history with Herod. The contest will end with one of them dead. Raimi's visual grammar is extraordinary throughout. Fisheye lenses distort townspeople into grotesques. Extreme close-ups on trigger fingers and blinking eyes recall Leone at his most maximalist. And POV bullet shots through bodies were a technical innovation that reportedly consumed a disproportionate portion of the budget. He is not imitating the spaghetti Western. He is extrapolating it into American expressionism. What most people don't fully register about this film is who is in the supporting cast. The reformed outlaw Court is played by Russell Crowe in his first major American film, 2 years before L.A. Confidential, before anyone outside of Australia knew his name. The villain's illegitimate son, Fee the Kid Herod, is played by Leonardo DiCaprio between What's Eating Gilbert Grape and Romeo plus Juliet, before he was a global star. Watching this film today, knowing what both became, is a genuinely astonishing experience. DiCaprio burns every scene he appears in. Sharon Stone produced the film herself to create a female-led Western that subverted the genre's gender dynamics. Its commercial failure was used as evidence against female action leads for years afterward. That conclusion has only become more clearly wrong with time. A visually riotous, completely committed, criminally underseen film. One of the great what-ifs of 90s cinema. And that brings us to number 1. There is only one film on this list that addresses something almost no Hollywood film has attempted. The specific, irreducible psychological reality of surviving a catastrophe when others did not. Not the drama of the disaster itself. The strange, disorienting territory that follows survival. The territory that has no grammar in mainstream cinema, because it is not dramatic in any conventional sense. It is simply true. Fearless. 1993, directed by Peter Weir. Jeff Bridges plays Max Klein, a man who walks away from a catastrophic plane crash carrying a baby he found in the aisle. He does not call his wife immediately. He goes to a hotel, orders strawberries. He has been allergic to them his entire life, eats them, and feels nothing but a vast, inexplicable calm. He is not in shock. He has been transformed. The crash has removed his fear of death entirely, and with it, his capacity for ordinary life, for connection, for the emotions that organize human social existence. He is alive and feels as though he has already died. This is not a psychological thriller, which is how it was marketed. It is not a disaster film. It is not a romance, though it contains one of sorts. It is a film about a man who has passed through something so far outside the range of ordinary human experience that he can no longer locate himself inside the life waiting for him on the other side. And it is the most precise and honest depiction of that psychological condition I have ever seen in an American film. A trauma psychologist pairs Max with another survivor, Carla Rodrigo, Rosie Perez, devastating in her Oscar-nominated performance, paralyzed by guilt over her infant son's death in the crash. Their friendship, two people whose relationship to reality has been permanently altered in incompatible directions, is the film's emotional center. Perez carries the role with a rawness that earns every scene she's in. What most people don't know is what Jeff Bridges does here. His performance is the finest of his career before Crazy Heart, and that film won him the Oscar. He plays at least 4 distinct psychological states across the film: the pre-crash suburban professional, the post-crash liberated drifter, the man trying to return to his family, and the man who no longer knows if he can. The transitions between them are almost entirely internal, visible in his eyes, and the specific gravity of how he occupies space. That he was not nominated for Best Actor in 1993 remains one of the most inexplicable oversights in Academy Awards history. Peter Weir directs with extraordinary restraint. The crash sequence itself is shown in fragments, without the grammar of disaster movie spectacle. It feels like memory rather than event. This choice alone separates the film from everything in its genre. It is not interested in the crash as spectacle. It is interested in what the crash leaves behind. There is a moment in Fearless, late in the film, in a scene I am not going to describe because you need to encounter it without preparation, where everything the film has been building toward arrives simultaneously, and Max's distance from ordinary life and his desperate need for it collide in a way that is almost physically affecting. I have never fully recovered from that scene. I don't want to. Fearless belongs in the conversation with ordinary people and The Sweet Hereafter as one of the finest American films about collective trauma and its aftermath. It was a box office failure, not because it was wrong, but because it was unclassifiable. And the studio, unwilling to trust an audience with something that resisted easy description, gave it no chance to find the people who needed it. Those people existed in 1993. They just never found it. They exist in far greater numbers now. If you haven't seen it, you have a genuinely extraordinary evening waiting for you. Fix that immediately. From number 10 to number 1, what this list proves is that the 1990s studio system was simultaneously at its most commercially powerful and its most intellectually timid. The blockbuster machine had fully matured into a mechanism that rewarded spectacle over ambition, legibility over complexity, and franchise potential over singular vision. These 10 films are casualties of that machine. Works too strange, too demanding, too tonally unusual, or simply too unlucky to find their audience in a marketplace that had no patience for them. What they share is not merely quality, but necessity. Each was made by people who believed in what they were doing, and each spoke a truth their moment wasn't ready to hear. The internet didn't create their greatness. It simply gave that greatness the audience it had always deserved. But I know you have opinions. What got left off? Where is Dark Half? Where is The Long Kiss Goodnight? Should Miller's Crossing be higher? Should Fearless be on this list at all? Or is it too unknown to qualify as secretly great rather than simply unknown? Tell me. I read everything. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of viewer this channel exists for. The next video is coming. And if this list told you anything about how much the 90s buried, that one will take you somewhere you haven't been before.